Thank you all for joining us for the fourth and last episode of Sparring Academy. Today we talk in English as we have an international guest and we want to have a lively discussion with him. My name is Carolina Heberling and I will preside over today's session. As I'm not from the Academy, I will shortly introduce myself. I'm the dramaturg of Peace Damage and I currently work at LMU Munich as a scholar in the special research field Cultures of Vigilance, where I write my dissertation on the theater history of Munich in the 1920s. Before introducing our keynote speaker today, I would like to say thank you to several partners we had in this project on behalf of Peace Damage. So thank you to Lothringer 13, Akademieverein München and the Akademie der Bildenden Künste München, as well as a big thank you to the Kulturreferat who financed parts of this Sparring Academy sessions we had. They also financed a workshop that took place during the last 3 days, which was held by our international guests. And now I'm happy to introduce to you Ahmet Ögüt, a conceptual artist from Turkey. He was born in 1981 in Diyarbakir and studied in Ankara, Istanbul, and Amsterdam. Afterwards, he exhibited in many different countries, such as the United States, Malaysia, Australia, Turkey, Denmark, the Netherlands, Germany, and Italy. In 2009, his work was part of the Turkish Pavilion at the Venice Biennial. 2012, he founded the so-called Silent University, a university run by displaced people and forced migrants. As he will introduce the concept of Silent University himself, I will not talk about this for longer. Leave the stage to Ahmet. Please welcome him.
Thank you very much for the invitation. There are a few things I will explain first. First of all, I'm actually in Munich. I'm here as a guest of Peace Damage to do a seminar and to talk about very urgent topics. But I was supposed to come here as guest professor of the Academy, invited by the students that are also part of Peace Damage. Well, this process, the news came, I think, around August, and it was 3 months of negotiations with the Academy, and it was some basic things. This happens because I often lecture in different academies, not only in Europe. I've been doing this from US to Australia to Asia to any country, continent you can imagine. And it has been many years. So since I have been involving in many different academies and many different levels, through the seminars, lectures, workshops, I also get to learn how their administrative and bureaucratic systems work. Through the experience of Silent University as well, I have learned a lot about all these obstacles and how to deal with these obstacles, not as it is projected, as it's something maybe that's an individual issue, but it's a systematic issue. So some things looks very minor, actually connected to very major issues. So the reason I cannot be here as the guest of the Academy or anything to do with Academy was that Academy was unable to recognize my legal invoice from Netherlands. So as a freelancer, independent working artist and mentor, I work with different institutions, and often there's this conversations internally happening. Externally, most people don't know that an invoice that is written from one country to another country can be an issue. But this can be a bigger issue between continents. It's often a surprise. Also, it's an issue within the European Union. If you think of when the concept of European Union was introduced, this was also only for the kind of borderless situation for the European Union privileged citizens, and we are not even talking about the non-citizens in this case. And so my international tax number was not recognized, or my invoice from Netherlands was not recognized, and it was also confirmed that, and we were told by the council of the Academy, because it wasn't only me, there was also Jonas Stahl, who was supposed to be guest professor this year at the Academy visiting. We were both told that our invoice, if you try to send an invoice from Netherlands, this is a violation of state law of Germany. And so suddenly we were in the position of criminals. And this was a very interesting thing to hear, which is actually the case. It is not only the case of Akademie in Munich, but the state academies, we find out that all around Germany have to invite guest professors on the basis of those professors paying taxes only in this country, not in any other European country. So us paying taxes in another European country can be considered as violation of local, national, state laws, which also make it clear that this is an idea, something that is drafted, something that is decided before the concept of European Union, and let's say nation-state mentality that makes automatically the school provincial. We can argue on this. How come we can go from one innocent small invoice to this kind of statement that also makes it impossible for me or for Jonas or for anyone who's coming from outside of Germany and paying taxes in those countries to come and execute something in the level of professorship as a guest. So going back to that, so I'm invited on different support. It is not a support from the Academy. It actually has nothing to do with the Academy's promised support, an invitation, but again, in connection and by direct invitation of the students of the Academy. So we have to make this distinguish this from the other situation. Now the whole conference is online, so it's hard to distinguish that. Where I come to this conclusion doesn't come from nowhere. Not only my individual experience as an independent artist, traveling independent artist for over a decade, and lecturing and mentoring in different art academies and art institutions, but also my experience through Silent University as a radical pedagogy modality. So now I'm going to screen share. Let's see, and go to my presentation. How do we do that? Because I didn't use GoToMeetings before. I always use different ones.
I think Susanne has to give you the right to do it. Susanne,
okay. Can you give me the right to screen share? I see the button here.
Yeah, I can do it, but I think every one of the organizers can do it too, but I tried one more moment.
Yeah, see the button. I'm waiting to click.
Yeah. Okay, so do you see the button
able to
Bildschirm screen?
Okay, you must be seeing my screen now. Is it working?
Yes.
All right, so you see it full screen presentation?
Yes, we do.
All right, perfect. If you hear me well, I will continue.
We hear you well, please do so.
Perfect. Okay, so what is Silent University? Silent University may sound it's an educational platform only focusing on marginalized communities, but it's actually addressing an education modality that we all need in the mainstream version of the education for all. In 2012, I was invited for a residency as an artist by Tate and Delphina Foundation, and I was asked to develop a community project. I was very critical of this invitation itself because I was believing that temporary commitment is a problematic approach for community engagement, especially an artist residency is limited. Because the moment you involve communities that most of the time actually requires a long-term or lifetime engagement. And while thinking critically, I've been learning how such idea can be developed. So my residency was limited to 1 year, and as soon as I come up with the idea of Silent University, I knew it was gonna last a lot longer than 1 year. I knew it was gonna last a lot longer than my own, even necessity of my own engagement, and also the very first institution's engagement. So what's Silent University? In my first experience in London, that was the first branch, because through my residency, I discovered that there was a lot of community organizations focusing on different groups of people based on their age, their nationality, where they come from, or gender, or many different categories. But there was no such organization that is focusing on knowledge of everyone, anyone coming from anywhere, speaking any language, coming from any background. So back in their countries, all our participants have been academics or having specific jobs, and they cannot execute it in the countries where they arrive. So here you can see examples of first ever group of participants in London and Stockholm. And you can see also, it's hard to read, I guess it's very little text here, but I can tell you that, you know, they included doctors, accountants, human rights activists, language teachers, calligraphers, nurses, lawyers, and so on. So they all came from all kinds of various backgrounds, speaking all kinds of different languages. So this knowledge was not supposed to be activated at that time in London, but also elsewhere immediately, because the first thing for new arrivals to obtain is their legal documents, and their legal documents process was taking up to 20 years, confirmation of that. So they could be in limbo for such a long time, and that would also make it impossible to activate their knowledge. On top, they might even forget their knowledge because they won't have the chance to activate it. So there was also another situation, like we are not talking about here the singular limitations. There are also legal limitations and administrative limitations and language limitations. So how can you imagine an education platform that goes beyond all these obstacles? We are dealing with this, you know, not recognition of my Dutch passport, for instance, but Dutch invoice, for instance, in the case of this visit here, not me being not able to be guest professor because I come from another country. But here the situation is that all participants didn't even have any legal documents. They didn't have IBAN numbers. They didn't have. They were not able to write invoices, or they didn't have bank accounts. So in this case, how can you acknowledge somebody's knowledge and recognize it immediately? So our mission was that, in terms also of not to put them in danger, we also protected their identities, their names, if in specific cases it was needed. And how can you even activate somebody's knowledge that is dangerous to go in front of any kind of audience? And how can you just like not wait and do it immediately right away? So we skipped all these authorization processes, and I told the institutions, at first it was a combination of art institution, an NGO, and an academy, combination of these three types of institutions, and asking them that is their creative task to acknowledge every lecturer's needs. So it is not their failure if they cannot provide invoices or bank accounts. It is your failure if you cannot find a way to pay them equally as you pay the other speakers or other artists or other lecturers invite. So this became a process of a transformative process for the institutions involved. Of course, when we were able to do that, we were able to immediately start lectures. But for instance, in this case, like 2 years later, we were able to also show the face and the name of our lecturer, Bridget, And there was many cases like that. So the idea is like we could immediately acknowledge somebody's knowledge without getting stuck with all these obstacles. Invented artificial bureaucratic and administrative obstacle, but rather immediately prioritizing knowledge and education itself. On top, lecturers were lecturing in different languages. So that also created other barriers, normally limitations. So if you are in a country that the main language, let's say German, or if you are in another country, the main language, spoken language is Swedish, first of all, what is required also to learn this language first. So a lot of people have to completely redo their education. So if they were doctors in Latin America somewhere and come back to London or Sweden, they have to restudy the whole thing, and maybe another 10 years, spend another 20 years until they could obtain another academic title spoken in that local language. We don't limit ourselves to any specific particular language, but we acted in multiple languages. So anyone can act their knowledge in any language, native language they prefer, but it was the responsibility of the people that are in the room or organizers to figure out how to translate it. As long as they can figure out to translate that, then others could have access the knowledge. But it wasn't the issue or the problem or project to the lecturers to sort this problem out. So it was not their problem. It was actually their right. There was a lot of people also taking part, and we will talk about it. We didn't call anyone student, but the usership idea was also not based on charging students or any participants monetary ways. We used the time and skill activation, and these worked quite well. And there was a lot of people donated over 1,800 hours, and they come from different backgrounds. There was journalists, there was academics, there was professors, there was artists, there was refugee professional researchers, writers, coordinators, curators, database officers, and so on, as you can imagine. So how diverse was people also interested with our and have been interested with our platform. At some point, it went up to 5 different branches, and the Western European branches. So here you can see the examples. 2 branches that was established in Germany, and one of them is still active in rural area, and Hamburg one was active, and Stockholm is still active, and the collaborating institutions. So you see the diverse institutional collaborations here. Sometimes they're art background, sometimes not. The Amman and the Athens were examples. They were more grassrooted, and they were more based on the engagement and motivation of the community wanting to have a silent university branches happen that, and they were able to run them for a few years in those cities as well. And this was a moment when we were able to meet. But this was pre-COVID times that we had other reasons that people couldn't travel. Since they didn't have legal documents, any legal documents, they couldn't leave the countries they claim asylum. So most of our lectures had to happen online if they wanted to be in touch with other silent university branches, and only few people from those branches were able to travel. So some of our coordinators from all those cities could get this for instance, in this kind of unique moment together. And this is another moment we got an award at Silent University, and we were able to continue a few more years in London with the support of that award and collaborate with Oxford University, which was also interesting that our lecturers were very quickly next to side-by-side lecturing professors from Oxford University or other respected universities in also other countries where the branches were. Here you can see we are trying to rewrite our ideological principles in Arabic, which was also kind of a rethinking moment for the terminology. The refugee term was kind of invalid the moment we started try to initiated in Amman, that we realized the term refugees is such a Western-centered term, and it doesn't make sense necessarily in Amman because there's more Palestinians, let's say, that arrived, and the neighborhood, the camps they were in became neighborhoods compared to the number of Jordanians living in there. So, and then there are also new arrivals, Syrians, and at the time Iraqis escaped from ISIS attacks, and they all had different kind of studies, and it was not really making sense to call any of these groups refugees in that context, in that very different kind of cosmopolitan context. These examples from those lectures, and also gatherings in Athens and some other events, for instance, participation of Silent University in other kind of events in Hamburg, and debates they organized. And here's where the term comes from. You know, it was this convention that was decided that gives people the right to claim for asylum in 1951 Refugee Convention, and at that time it made sense to use that term, but we really need to replace it with the more updated terms. You know, how do we call and do we actually supposed to group people this way? You know, or replace it with other terminologies that are actually common use, like forced migrants, humanitarian protection applicants, vulnerable communities. You can see we always operated in multiple languages, and most of our events in these branches happened in at least 4 or 5 different languages. So Silent University's aim has been this decentralized, participatory, horizontal, and autonomous modality of education. And if you read the sentence, clearly it is not about a marginalized community. It's about the entire failure of education system, the direction it's going, unless we decide to protect it and preserve the good things about it. When it's too late, if we forget that we are this social welfare system in Europe that is not really happening in many different countries. Here you also see Saskia Sassens, this important thing she says, instead of authorization, recognition is very much underestimated because it's actually sometimes more valid than authorization. Depends if you do it collectively. I'm gonna skip those. I already looked at this. This is a publication as was representing silent universities in different branches. Not only a success story, but also the failures we face or dangers and different obstacles we face. Sometimes even security was an absolute danger to organize in certain cities. Is one of the recent new branches has been on its way in Copenhagen. And this was Silent University Nordic Network in between Helsinki, Stockholm, and Copenhagen meeting from last year. This is the currently active 2 branches. After almost 10 years, we could still talk about this because the modality was based on this need and urgency. And it is still needed. It is still needed because the mainstream education system really didn't improve itself, and it's kind of going backwards in most countries. I also want to talk about that some of our participants, they came as lecturers and they didn't expect to do anything organizational until they feel the confidence themselves and empowerment themselves. And this is what happened. For instance, Stockholm is run by one of our first lecturer, Fahima, who became the main coordinator there. And she has twice a week meetings with a lot of attendance with legal advice and language teaching courses or gardening she's doing there, and she took the format beyond its limits. And the same thing happened in Mülheim. It was also a group of coordinators. They came first as lecturers and they took over after the director left, after the first curator left. they took over, but institutions didn't disappear. New directors continue to support, and they still have their space, they still have their program run by themselves, represented in this 4 different languages. We have definitely every time moderated and represented. And on top, they also not only organizing classical lectures, for instance, Bridget organized Intercultural Women's Empowerment Network, because there was a lot of women cannot attend in mixed meetings, and they also develop other modalities there as well, like how they can deal with these legal and language obstacles. And they managed to find really good ways. Even they managed to introduce the 3rd language in the region to any theater, or most of the organizations adapted the 3rd language, taking Silent University as an example in the region. Here you can see Justin and Bridget was taking part in Bauhaus Dessau festival, Parliament of School Festival, representing Silent University there instead of me. And I think that's kind of the most important part right now, that this me becoming more of a guest, and they become taking the agency to this level. That's Bridget doing in Münster at TEDx talk, explaining the adventure she went through, and also Silent University coordination story. And here you can see Fahima got this year local hero prize. So the position of them coming first as a guest and becoming more and more taking the initiative, we needed all these years, but it was also formulated around this idea. It wasn't formulated around the idea of a highly claimed ownership of the first initiators, but it was a modality based on how to improve and in a radical way education system, and really not through the integration politics, but through the agency of everyone involved, which has been the key for Silent University. So I think my time, I'm running out of time, but I want to mention this a little bit. If I have time, may I ask that?
You still do, so please feel free.
Okay, so I'm going to quickly explain this. So I'm going back to the US system, and UK system is now already copying US system until the end of 90s, and I'm afraid it's also soon arriving to Europe. European system might take over, and privatization and also high level of tuition fees for studying. So in US, anyone since quite a while studying, they have to, this is the UK version, let me see, I have the UK slide here, this US one, but so anyone studying in US, not only art, but any college, any university, they need to take huge amount of loans from the bank. So most of the people graduate from university, even if they get the job in their departments, which they could be the lucky ones to get that, they need to pay these loans for a long period of time, usually up to 20 years. And they're unable to do so even if they get income, because it's such high amount of money. We're talking about average $250,000 people graduate from college and art college also and academies. They need to pay back, and they are unable to. So these numbers grow and grow and grow. So I invited a group of artists also to make sculptures to infinity fundraise for this problem through an activist organization in US. What they do is they buy the loans from the banks like a private agency or company by fundraising, much cheaper than banks going after people through other agencies and collecting this money. So if they so far collected $700,000 fundraising they did, which they could abolish $31 million student debt, and tell people that they don't have to pay that back. But we are talking about a huge, the biggest debt in the US is the student debt, and they were able to cover 31 million of it and abolish it, this small group of activists. And we also developed the sculptures by multiple artists, and they could, everything fundraised through the sculptures went to this organization as well. I was also thinking that if they are speculated in the art market in the future, the sculptures, because they are also mostly made by well-known names, still through the conceptual contract, all the money will go to the same organization to support their ideas for fundraising, to abolish people's student debt. And here you can see the other sculptures from US done by few artists, and here you can see the versions in UK later. This project was adapted in UK. I invited 3 other artists, Liam Gillick, Susan Hiller, and Koshko Majuka, to make sculptures, and they traveled for 2 years around different museums as part of British Art Show, and they fundraised during that 2 years for an equivalent activist organization called Jubilee Debt Campaign in UK. This tuition fee is introduced in UK first time in 1998, and it started with £1,000. And latest information I have that it went up to 9,000, probably now a lot more per semester. So you can see that if you were a student before 1998 in UK, you didn't have to pay to study. And very rapidly, this system has been changing. And it is also not impossible that it might come and find students in countries like Germany or Netherlands and other countries with the corporatization of the universities and administration taking more and more over with different kind of intentions, not humanitarian departments taking over, not more professors taking over schools, not students are taking agency, but rather administration taking more and more over the control. We might end up in these other countries for this kind of scenario, and I still hope that it won't happen anytime soon, but it may also happen soon. So we talked about the teachers and the right to educate. We talk about the right to educate it, and I'm still hoping for this kind of decentralized, horizontal, free education that no one needs to pay for it, and but the teachers will have the right to be equally to be paid. Not on the basis of some local administrative obstacles. That is also what happened to me, and that's why I'm unable to also be a guest professor at the Akademie. And I can explain you more of this with the Q&A part. Thank you. I will stop screen sharing.
So thank you so much, Ahmet, for introducing us to Silent University and Today After Debt. I think there are a lot of people who are interested in asking questions to you, but before we open up for a Q&A session, we decided to do a little wrap up of the last 3 weeks and the last talks we had. I'm happy to see that some of the people who had been in the discussions before are back as guests. Welcome everybody who's here. What did we talk about? In the first week, in the first session of Sparring Academy, we talked about democratic educational concepts. As guests, we had Leo Selinger, founder of Luana School Augsburg, Sophie Köhler and Annalena Steinbach, members of the artists collective FPKK, Freies Pädagogisches Künstlerisches Kollektiv, and Margarete Henze, a member of the artists collective Democratic Arts and director of the documentary Freistunde, Doing Nothing All Day Long. What were the learning points from the first session about democratic educational concepts? Democratic schools offer a participatory learning environment, taking individual requirements into account and bringing together pupils of different age groups. As they function need-based, these schools constantly change. School communities can create exactly the kind of school they need. In this setting, knowledge is not concentrated on one authority, but emerges in the act of joint learning. Therefore, everyone can be teacher and student at the same time, switching from one role to another. If hierarchy occurs, it is justified by expertise, not by job title. That is why democratic schools often invite experts from outside to tutor their students. Learning in a grassroots democratic environment does not mean learning in chaos. Teachers and other staff members are expected to facilitate an atmosphere of effective joint learning. They are therefore advisors, caregivers, and trustees for their students. They create safe spaces and interfere if knowledge is not based on reliable sources. Furthermore, they train older pupils in taking exams, familiarizing them with the testing atmosphere. Sadly, in Germany, democratic learning concepts still have to face a lot of bureaucracy, hence most schools are privately financed. For this reason, students often have a privileged middle-class background. This poses the question of participation, accessibility, and social diversity to the school communities, questions that have not fully been answered yet. That was week 1. In week 2, we talked about interdisciplinary foundation courses held at art academies. Therefore, we invited Eva von Platen-Hallermund, a lecturer at the Academy of Fine Arts in Nuremberg, Sheila Katami, professor at Braunschweig University of Art, Dietmar Rübel, now professor at the Academy of Fine Arts in Munich and former professor at the Dresden Academy of Fine Arts. All 3 of them had in common that they installed these interdisciplinary basic studies at their universities. And as a 4th and final guest, we heard Julius Niemeyer, an architect and student at the Academy of Fine Arts, who somehow represented a critical voice towards foundation courses at art academies. What did we take from the second session? Foundation courses form a common start for freshers regardless of the subject they chose to study. They vary in duration, content, and structure of their courses. While at some schools they run parallel to subject-specific classes, other universities provide only for a commune curriculum. A joint start allows the scholars to develop a shared idea of what artistic practice is about and enables the students to get in touch with people from other disciplines, hereby widening their approach to art. Foundation courses dismantle hierarchies by taking into account different prior knowledges of their scholars. They introduce a variety of materials and techniques to the students and teach crucial concepts of art theory and history. They also help to establish a mutual vocabulary which eases the scholar's path into the academic discussion. Furthermore, basic studies offer a safe space in which students can try out ideas without the pressure to succeed. Moreover, they prevent the students from binding themselves to one fixed notion of art too early in their artistic career. Nevertheless, basic studies also have to be perceived critically. Students who already have an academic degree in a similar field do not need propedeutic classes, but rather demand for time and leisure to focus on their personal artistic progress. Besides that, it takes longer for scholars to develop an independent approach to art if everything they do is pre-structured by the academy. Moreover, basic classes bear the risk of creating in and out groups and sanctioning unusual understandings of art, as to some extent they centralize the power of interpretation. Ultimately, basic classes need to balance between academic standards and personal freedom, between common practices and individual growth. After that, we had a break of 2 weeks and continued our sessions in December. And in the 3rd week, which took part last week, we talked about transdisciplinary artistic research. As guests, we had Katrin Busch, professor at the Berlin University of Arts and president at the German Society of Artistic Research. Diogo da Cruz, I saw you already in the talk. He works for Hermann Pitz at the Academy here in Munich. And Judith Neuenhäuser, an artist and former student at the Academy of Fine Arts in Munich, who deploys ethnologic methods in her artwork. What did we take from this session? Artistic research is an independent practice of creating, storing, and transferring knowledge. It can be seen as an intermediate space between artistic practice and scientific research, since it deploys methods from both fields. In doing so, artistic research questions well-established ways of knowledge production. It puts traditional scientific methods at risk, seeking for another mindset in order to gain insight in its subject. Therefore, artistic research is highly transdisciplinary because it gets in touch with disciplines such as physics, ethnology, cultural studies, as well as political and social sciences. Despite this interaction between the disciplines, artistic research should not simply be apprehended as a kind of applied science or educational strategy. It has the very unique power to include irony, provocation, and speculation into the aesthetic process. In contrast to other European countries, artistic research in Germany is still lacking for a long tradition of practice and therefore has not been institutionalized yet. As knowledge has become an expensive commodity in a knowledge-based society, artistic research is always at risk of being subject to a capitalist logic of exploitation, which is incompatible to the idea of an open-end research. This raises the question whether art academies should integrate artistic research into their curriculum, as they are not dependent on the market situation and function as spaces of experiment and free thought. Installing specific professorships and setting up PhD programs are possible ways to bind artistic research to academic institutions. Above all these discussions, I would like to mention that there were some real-life changes in the Bavarian educational politics. We are facing a revision of the Higher Education Act of the state of Bavaria. As we planned the sessions, we didn't have in mind that it would become so real, what we were talking about. But this amendment of the Higher Education Act always followed us during the discussions, so I guess it might come up as well today evening. As I did the wrap up now, I would like to open up the panel. First of all, welcoming the organizers of Sparring Academy, Maria, Anneke, Mariella, and Susanne. And I would like to ask to you what kind of learning points you take from the last 4 weeks and also from the workshop, and yeah, feel free to answer.
Okay, so first of all, thank you so much, Ahmet and Caro, for making this talk tonight possible. Yeah, it was really nice summary you did, and also really nice lecture you did. And yeah, I mean, we came up with this idea of the whole idea of Sparring Academy, this talk series, and wanted to give the opportunity to talk about vital topics in academic surroundings, which we felt should be stressed a bit more. And we did a lot of organization and could find lots of people joining us, as you mentioned, Caro. And what we can say from all those four talks, including this one tonight, is really that there is it's needed to talk about certain topics a bit more in detail to really to get a kind of vision of how education in general, but also how the academy here in Munich can and should develop. This is really vital to us. And what is also planned is like to extend this kind of series with other people who would contribute their content. But let's talk about it later maybe. But I felt it was so inspiring to talk to all those people with so many different experience all over, I would say, Europe, and to bring in all this knowledge and all the experiences in our kind of room, digital room we created. And yeah, I felt it's really it was worth it to really learn from all those people who already did so much work and yeah, found out really important aspects of education, but also about how a system in general can be structured to achieve a bit more a wider, maybe also a horizontal way of living together, and also about educationing.
Do Mariella and Maria want to add something? If no, I would open up for the whole panel for a Q&A session, if it's okay. Okay, so Maria, I see you want to say something.
Should I talk? Okay. I just wanted to say, because when we started the series, or also the project or the collective, we were thinking about when you're studying at a university or when you're working in structures, on who is it to work on these structures to like get joy out of it or get your knowledge out of it. And at this talk series, we like were bestätigt, confirmed in that point that it's also on the students to work on the structure, and also on every member who is part of the academy or an university or school or something. And I think that's a point where we can start off to like come together and collaborate.
Okay, so I guess it's time for questioning now. If you have a question, just put on your camera. If you feel uncomfortable with putting on your camera, you can also write the question into the chat. Don't hesitate if your English isn't perfect. We'll try to help wherever we can with translating stuff. So be courageous and ask questions. I will ask the first. Susanne, okay.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, hi. Yeah, I would like. I have a question for Ahmet, and I wanted to ask him what were the topics you discussed in Silent University, and how did you find the people who want to share their knowledge? How? Yeah, maybe you can a little bit elaborate on the contents and the problems and the questions which you discussed there, and how you find the people.
Yeah, I mean, we talking about people who are in their most hypersensitive moments, and they really don't have normally any attention to knowledge itself, but other things that seems more urgent, or that's what they are told to. So their first goal is to obtain legal documents, right? So in that moment, when you approach, some of them are also underground. They don't even do the application, or they don't know where to stay, or they don't like very, very basic things. If that urgent questions are there, very practical one, how can you make someone even focus on knowledge and think that this is actually the most political action they can take at that moment? You know, this very abstract concept. Somehow we managed, because in the beginning I only had a logo, nothing else. So imagine me going between community organizations from one to another and talking to community leaders. I also realized community leaders know too little about people coming there. They only see them people coming in groups, and they are maybe getting a lunch, or they are taking part in an activity, but individually they didn't know much about who might have had what kind of higher degree of education or job back in their countries. This never becomes the subject or topic. So it wasn't the way that to go to a community leader that is already privileged, you know, from that country, and even running that space and having daily encounters with people to reach out to people. As soon after I realized this is the worst idea to do so, and the better idea is some chances, you know, that you actually have. Like often language is an obstacle. So if I try to talk to someone in English and they the second language they know, you know, if they come from Eritrea and they speak French or their native language, I can't, right? We need anyway someone else from the community to somehow translate to the second or the third language. So it was even to communicate something basic was difficult. But this difficulty, the struggle, was the part of the education, the radical education idea. The radical education idea comes from there. You even don't have some given basic devices. First of all, one common language that's not there. Second of all, you cannot ask people, show me diplomas or certificates. They might have something, but you have to trust them. So you basically have to develop a trust relationship. And this trust relationship is something super fragile, but once it is established, it is so concrete, it's so solid. So if somebody from the community that is trusted by other members of community understands the idea, then everybody understands in their languages within the community. Everybody follows that person. That's why Fahima became such a key person in Stockholm, or Bridget became such a key, she's from Cameroon, she became such a key person in Mülheim, and her husband and some others, because every let's say you have 4 or 5 members, they can bring potentially easily 20, 30 other people. And these people will never going to participate in any other formal, informal, artistic workshop and things like that unless there is something practical to take. But they're not going to actively participate. So the idea was like, I was from the beginning saying that no worry about showing any diploma, certificate, anything. Just come as you are. Don't worry about speaking the common language. Just come as you are and just be as you are. And we will make sure that we are not putting you in danger. We are not putting you in a more stressful situation that you are already overloaded with. But we will acknowledge and recognize who you are as you are. So we had to, not worry about some knowledge degree, like measurement of the knowledge at first. And this comes later with their agency. When the agency comes, the organizational agency becomes actually as important as the knowledge itself. So it goes hand in hand. When they know how to organize things, then the knowledge gets stronger, and it also combined with how you develop more and more trust among the newcomers. So then the newcomers join and then take over. So whole process was really based on this old school idea of trust, and really making people feel they're in a safe place and they are there not to deal with more obstacles, but actually come over with all these obstacles that they are told that they will never be over with. But then shortly after they got permits and citizenships, as soon as they got confident and empowered, self-empowered, all these things happened so fast. So of all these years of waiting, suddenly disappeared.
Okay, interesting. Thanks.
Thank you for the question.
I have a question too. Actually, I have 2 questions. You showed us the branches of the Silent University, and you said that some are still active, others aren't. I can imagine that for people who are forced to leave their countries, it's important to have stability in their lives and to have like a progress that is continuing. Can you tell us a bit about why some of the universities still exist and at other places they don't? This would be one question.
Yeah, actually that could be also because, let's answer this and then we get the second one. For instance, in London, every single person, they came, almost everyone without documents, they arrived, and after the end of 3rd year, they all had permits. 2 of them had citizenship. So you can see this as a success story of the branch, but also a failure story of branch participants. They secured their positions in better places, but they were unable to self-organize, because it was also the first branch, to transfer that knowledge they obtained during these 3 years to the newcomers. So there was no newcomers really happening unless I was there present. So I realized me involving a lot more didn't make it easier for them to take over an agency, and institution was not also prepared for it so much, to this kind of takeover. So when a director leaves, new director comes, someone needs to be there to explain. Who will be? Someone from the community, someone from previous coordinator. So these takeovers are usually quite difficult moments of transformation, but it's also the magical moment, when you see it actually happen. So these 2 branches, they continued with completely new directors of the institutions and new coordinators, and they took over the coordinators themselves, and also they became in charge of the finances of the administration themselves. So they were not just like sitting there and somebody, deciding all these things anymore. Or they didn't have to get in touch with me anymore at some point because it became self-efficient institutionally. So it was not a bad story for the participants in London. And with our efforts, it could continue 2 extra years because the budget was 1 year. But let's say in Hamburg, it was 3 years budget and it continued 3 years. But what happens when the budget finishes? You need to be ready. You need to have efficient, self-efficient institutional structure that someone needs to fundraise for the next period. And actually, new director there was also interested, and he was able to continue 6 more months with also coordinators taking over. So it was almost another successful for a while model there too, also quite radical way. So I don't think that in the beginning I thought like we shouldn't have so many and all of them should last forever. But now I see that some of them have lifetime, and if it develops something for the participants that they get this more long-term impact from it, that's also fine. That if it's not naturally happening, it ends there. But the idea doesn't end. So the idea continues maybe from there too. So I would not imagine this as a nomadic idea. It has to be locally strong everywhere it is, and interconnected internationally.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense to me and clears up a bit how the structures work you just described. When you talked about the process of starting up things, you were talking a lot about the process of translating and the difficulties that were coming up with language. And translation for me is not only translating words into other words, but also translating cultural concepts or ideas. And I wondered whether in the process of translation, the knowledge that was transferred somehow changed too, because it went from one culture to another. Did you have any experience of that kind? Maybe you can talk a bit about that.
Translation itself is also, okay, you lose the direct knowledge message from the direct knowledge, but you gain some other knowledge. Sometimes the word you use for translation can have multiple meanings than the original word you try to translate. So you might end up learning even more, even though it might go to different direction. When something is translated to multiple languages, there is this moment of chaos in the room, but we need that chaos. We need to have that chaos in order to have proper version of the knowledge. Proper version of the knowledge doesn't come with the main language of that country. Proper version of the knowledge comes with these multiple ways of understanding the same thing. So it's really important that as many languages as present at that one moment and synchronized in the same moment, and everyone in the room is active. It really makes everyone in the room active. It's not like one person speaking and then the other person asking something. It's really, while you're speaking, 5 other people translating into 5 different languages to each other. So I don't mean that this box is there, somebody doing. Still, you can do one extra language like that. You pay a lot of money to get one extra language with the headphones and special equipment. But if you want to do 5, 6, you still have to have people in the room. You still have to have this person from the box screaming in 3rd, 4th languages, telling you something and somebody saying something. These are really active gatherings, and that keeps everyone active. And that keeps everyone learning from each other, and that's very, very important way of exchange, knowledge exchange. Any questions from anyone in the room?
So if there is not anybody else, I would like to ask you another question, which is a very difficult.
But there was somebody who wanted to ask a question.
Hi, I want to ask a question, but I can wait for Witzke.
You can go ahead and we take afterwards. That's fine.
Okay, fine.
Please don't get both questions. I want to take both. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm working at a formal education institution, in fact, at the university, and I'm teaching to future teachers. So I'm really interested in what do you think did you learn that could be applied to a formal education context as well? So to be more specific, what do you think should I tell my future teachers how they should do teaching in schools?
Well, your future teachers, I hope you will leave them still a functional education system by the time they become teachers. because they might have to do a bigger fight for things that we think that are there, and they will be there for long term, but it might not be there. And these are basic rights. So first of all, we have to make number one priority education itself, knowledge itself. So which means anything else comes after it. It's a struggle, but it is not a prioritized struggle. Prioritized struggle is how we keep knowledge as number one priority, knowledge exchange, and actively between the position of teacher and student. So it's not a banking system that a teacher tells students and they learn something and they become teachers and they tell their students, something. So it's not like that. It is an active exchange. So they are subjects. So this US example, 18-year-old kids, they sign such loan contracts to get loans from banks for the next 4 years for their studies, not really knowing what is written in this contract, not really knowing what kind of obligations or what kind of rights they have, and they just sign something. They think they want to go to university and have higher education. They think that's what everyone does, and they sign it. They don't know in other countries that's actually not an obligation, and this might become a case here too. So at that early age, they need to learn how to take the agency, and this agency of students is there because, especially also, in some schools, you see that they get really ambitious if they pay a lot of money. But is this the productive ambition, or is this the kind of like panic ambition? You pay so much and you want to get maximum out of it. Or then there is this relaxed situation of professors having lifetime contracts that at some point they lose the interest in education or interest in students, but they are still occupying positions in academies and education platforms. What do we do with those people? We need to fire ourselves. If you don't learn how to fire yourself when the time comes, you cannot be a good teacher. You cannot be a good professor. When you know you are not there and you are there, but you don't have the interest anymore, you cannot just stay there just to make your living from it, or go do bad art and do exhibitions with it, because your income comes from teaching, but actually you have no interest in teaching. So this kind of ambivalent situation, like, a lot of artists, they teach because they kind of think that's their income, or, that the healthy relationship is there, that you can only decide. Sometimes system can make it more functional, but also we need to keep the system functional as well with our decisions. You say, okay, you're giving me all these rights, that's great. I want to have all my rights, equal rights to teach. I want to have my equal rights to study, but I see somebody else doesn't have it. So I occupy this position as a student or as a teacher that I don't necessarily deserve anymore. Let's fix this. Although I am the privileged one in this moment. I am the one who doesn't have to pay, or I am the one who get paid more than the others who comes as a guest, but spends more hours with students. How do we fix the situation? So it is really day-to-day practice, day-to-day negotiation with the administration. Then the administration and the leadership of the university goes to negotiate with the state, because states will push towards different direction, and sometimes the administration will push the humanitarian departments, professors to certain directions that it's not supposed to go. So this daily negotiation is needed from student level to directorship level to the level to policy changing conversation. And we cannot just pretend, especially I saw a lot of programs for after 2015, it became really popular to every university, also in Germany, started refugee programs, for students, or even getting like refugee teachers next to the professors, but not giving them any income, or students getting some credits, but they cannot really graduate from those universities. They just get some courses in the universities. Is this really a system change, or is this a symbolic gesture making the university look better? So we know why things are done, how. We just need to stay honest with them, and if you want a real change happen, we just have to be outspoken and sometimes risking our own incomes and our own privileges.
Thank you very much for sharing your perspective.
Thank you very much for the question. There was another question which I stopped earlier.
Yeah, it's just first Susanne and then Felicitas, if that's okay.
But I can wait with my question, so please, if there is another one.
Now it's your turn. We stopped you last time, so please.
Okay. I have the, so Carolina did a little wrap up about the things we talked about in this series organized by Peace Damage, and though the first one was about democratic structures, the second was teaching structures, the second was about a basic class or a foundational courses which in a way try to bridge the lack of knowledge or the lack of methods or whatever, or the lack of understanding what art could be, which the students have maybe coming directly from school to the university. And the second, and then we talked also about transdisciplinary studies and art as research, and also transdisciplinary studies in this way that, as you said before, it may also offer a kind of multiple ways of understanding the same thing, but in a different way, of course, as it happens in Silent University. And I wanted to ask you if you think of all these aspects we talked about, and also your concept of Silent University, which of these aspects would for you be a really essential part, or that should be a really essential part of an ideal art academy? What would you say are these aspects you would say, okay, yeah, great, we must have this and that, or would you say, no, we don't have to make a patchwork or like a combination of all these things, but we have to radical invent a new, totally new system, and how could this system look like?
Yeah, I mean, art academy, we need to question why, at the first place, why art academies should still exist. You know, why art academies should exist when you accept every year a certain amount of students, and then professors tell them maybe one of you will become artist, but the rest not. And then we call this art academy. So why the rest should go to these academies? How can we change this kind of approach? And this kind of approach cannot be changed when everything based on, social welfare state is a good one compared to what we mentioned in US and UK. But at the same time, it also creates this kind of lazy aspect of it. When you develop good skills to apply better for grants, you get grants, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you learn how to make better art, or you just find a way to live all your life with art grants. But it doesn't make you that artist that is being mentioned in the academy, that is, this the idealized virtuosity of being the lucky one, that is picked up by the commercial system and this and that. So the problem starts that even it is not a solution to become that one artist. What happens that if you bring those one artist, like let's say every year one of them produce from every school, from every city, then let's say 30 artists, 80 artists, 100 artists per country, very brilliant artists, what do they do together? Okay, they became the ones. They need to not only consider the ones, how they studied together, for what purpose. Was there any collective moment to make it safe, take care of each other, instead of an education system based on better application and competition? competition is not such a good thing. There is no legal number that we can say we need this amount of good artists. Maybe everyone goes to the academy can come out as good artists if they know how to better take care of each other. You know, if they know that it's not that it's next, this is the only option left. I go to the art academy, or let's see if I make it by the time I finish the academy, commercial gallery picks me up, I continue with art, and otherwise I become something else. Not that kind of mentality. Like everybody being very self-critical and taking care of each other, because the art world is kind of designed to alienate you and make you lonely. And only way you feel not lonely when you're under the umbrella of some kind of institution. So as an artist also, you either run under a successful gallery model, or you are supported by a very successful curator for the rest of your life, one curator, or one patron. But this is not the model that we should be aiming for or motivating the students for. I think it's a model that really can only work in that kind of really alienated, individualized environment, you know, even if it's successful or non-successful, how we can reverse the situation, not based on competition and application modality of education.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. One more question. Are we running out of time? I think a little bit.
I think we still have time, so Felicitas.
One more question. Yes.
Yes, I have a follow-up question to Martin. I developed it during Martin's question, and it's referring to both of you, because if I understand the way knowledge is transferred in Silent University correctly, then or translated, then I thought maybe it would be an answer, a possible answer to Martin's question would be you have to teach teachers as well as students to unlearn rather than to properly learn systematic knowledge. And I was wondering whether both of you agree with me, or whether that also could be unlearning or learning ways of unlearning could also be a tactic, or that could be applied to both systematic and non-systematic ways, institutions, or educational platforms.
Yeah, I think the term unlearned somehow became very popular in the art world the last couple of years, and it was widely used because it was kind of like an easy term to escape certain responsibilities. Or responsibility is not particularly to call it unlearning and then say, hey, I was not responsible. This was systematically given to me, and now like I'm not responsible. I'm unlearning. Not like kind of approach, but really understand the systematic failure of what we have learned or forced to learn, or systematically that was transferred to us in times that maybe we didn't have the agency. So you just have to claim your agency to reconfigure your criteria. And reconfiguring your criteria is not necessarily mean unlearning. It's really you have to look at the situation from multiple perspectives, not only from your own perspective that where you stand, but from the perspective of all these people. That's why I say Silent University is not about marginalized communities issues. It's all of our issues. We just think we are not in those situations. But we are all in those situations time to time because of our gender, because of our age, because of certain other criteria that are not the actual criteria. And this is not about unlearning. It is deliberate abuse of the system, because system allows that, and you just acknowledge that. Am I doing this or not? If you are not doing deliberate abuse of the system, there's nothing you should unlearn. The system itself is like that. And if you multiply yourself with the surrounding of people around you, then you don't have to do with unlearning. System cancel itself. So authorization means nothing because you recognize something else, like as Saskia Sassen said earlier in the slide.
So we still have a question in the chat, and I see that Margarete and Diogo also want to ask questions. I would suggest, Margarete, you start, then we do the two people.
Can we read the chat first?
We can also do the question first. That's no problem. Leah wrote us, and she was asking about learning platforms that are self-organized and that a lot of them start but stop existing. And why do you think that happens? And what self-organized educative platforms need to keep an eye on in order to make sure that they keep on existing? And how do you think they have to popularize the idea of a learning platform or apparatus? Maybe you can talk about this a bit.
Yeah, it's Black Mountain College is such a historical, monumental example to start with all these alternative education models. But there was also women teaching women by letter, sending letters in US, 50 years before this. And there was many different models because education basically was not possible for every gender back then or every race. And people had to invent their versions. This is more utopian, quite nostalgic and beautiful idea. Black Mountain College lives in rumors. Most of the documentaries about Black Mountain College, you don't have people to directly who experience it, but it's actually other people who experience it through other people talking about the legacy, which is good because we always wanted to imagine a school like that is made and built by everyone. You don't arrive to a building that is already made and it's there. You construct it. You grow vegetables around it. You just like go in the middle of nowhere and with all your colleagues. If you are all trapped in an island kind of situation, escaping from war, maybe from another continent. So Black Mountain College has a lot of nostalgic things that how we can completely leave and go somewhere else and reinvent from zero an education system. But sometimes people are trapped. So the later example, like in UK and US, there's a lot of alternative schools because it's really impossible to go to a normal college. People really have to stop going to school because they can't pay, they can't afford, they just really have to actively imagine another version, radical version of education. Is this sound coming from me? I'm not sure. There's some noise.
Maybe coming from Margarete.
Hi. I just want to say thank you for this great format. I'm really happy to hear all those interesting I can't say it. My English is not very good, but I just want to say that I have a different understanding to this unlearning thing. I guess it's also really important tool to come in a real dialogue. To have a real dialogue, you just first you have to be empty to really and ja, ich sag's vielleicht auf Deutsch und ihr helft mir. Ich denke, man muss sich erstmal leer machen, um wirklich in Dialog zu kommen, um wirklich zu verstehen, was der andere sagen will. Und deswegen finde ich Unlearning sehr wichtig. Also Unlearning ist für mich irgendwie ein anderer Ausdruck für in Dialog gehen. Genau. Aber vielen Dank für eure Arbeit und mir geht das Herz auf.
So maybe you can summarize. I understood partly.
Perfect. Margarete just said that you have, at first you somehow have to empty out yourself in order to get into dialogue with another person. And this process of emptying yourself from your expectations, ideas, etc., is what she understands as unlearning, and therefore feels it is valuable for a process of common learning. So.
Yeah, I can give an example. I mean, this is of course possible. You can do that, but I think it also comes with the responsibility. But it's responsibility that's not always in your hand, right? It's given to you somehow, and you were not aware when it was happening. So, for instance, like if I used to, most of the time I used to think inspiring artists for me. The first 5 names. For a specific thing, it's artists doing specific type of work. 5 artists I need to think of. They were all male artists come to my mind because of my distorted education. Then I didn't think at the time all the artists were inspiring me somehow male artists. I didn't pay attention. I was just inspired. But now I'm thinking, do I need to unlearn this, or do I kind of don't like most of them anymore, because also the way the ideologies, the way they acted, the way they their personalities also became as important for me. So, and then when I think now, I always start to learn more women artists or other artists of color that I really need to educate myself and keep educating myself. Equally coming to my mind, the first names, first name come to my mind. If somebody asks me, like, can you give me a name, if I do a studio visit, I pay attention to that more. So maybe one can call this unlearning. One can call that creating this important criteria that are there. There's like this defense, like, oh, of course, men did more better work. That's why we think of only male artists. No, that's the classical deliberate political manipulation answer. It's really I know the term like unlearning, it makes certain things easier, like the term refugee, but I always remain a little bit on the more political side because I don't want to take things from the easier way. I take it more complex direction, because I think these terminologies help us make things easier, but also remind myself the certain responsibilities that I have to kind of go through myself in terms of knowledge exchange. There was this question, I didn't fully read it actually, by Leah. Also, how do you think one can popularize the idea of self-organized learning platforms, apparatuses? I try to understand this question. Maybe, popularizing is not the right word here. Thinking that, the use of the self-organized learning platforms sometimes, most of the time, are better, more ideal than the main ones. That's why also there was a need to organize them. But they are supposed to reclaim what is there. So they are not always staying at the marginal corner of things. So they are not there to marginalize themselves. They are there to, for a while, become an example, to lead even to policy change, systematic change that is beyond what we say the academy, but also in state level or international level. And I'm still surprised that there is no international idea of it there yet. There's no protective shield for this ideal education we're talking about internationally, because somehow it is better organizational ways to keep it local, to keep it national, keep it based on one centralized language and centralized legal rules. And any other question?
Yeah, Diogo wrote that he still has a question. Diogo, do you want to put on your camera or do you want to write it in the chat?
Yeah, can you hear me well?
Yes,
my internet is a bit. I'll try to put on my camera. If you stop listening to me, just let me know.
Yeah, if you can put on the camera. Yeah, I see you.
First of all, thank you so much, Ahmet, for your talk. And yeah, I also want to note how somehow ashamed I am that I work in an institution that is unable to do basic European tax law and welcome you in the Academy as a guest. But at the same time, I'm very happy that that institution can have students that bring you anyway to Munich. You know, it's a very paradoxical thing happening. And my question is, it's rather superficial, but it's about the logo of the Silent University. And I was wondering how it looks like a very mainstream UK-based university emblematic symbol, but that's somehow as well in the website of Silent University. That perhaps it's a play, you know, because then it looks extremely official. Also, the students' card somehow. So I was wondering if you have a few words of like that decision of taking a symbol from the mainstream instead of creating a, you know, a kind of one that would not be connected somehow to existing universities.
Yeah, so institutional identity made, you know, the power of institution made with multiple things. Surplus comes from, you know, the history of it, how for how long it's there. You know, this UK style universities, they are there like for many like hundreds of years, and they are there and they're established. They don't even change the look. They keep the traditional buildings, you know. And if you go to Cambridge or Oxford, you see that postcard from 1800 looks the same as 2020, which is very weird feeling. But that's kind of the heritage that kind of also keep it more important. This is one other thing, because like, for how long it is there, that makes it's like wine, you know, that the older it gets, the knowledge is more maybe special or something. But then there is this institutional identities that nothing to do with the building. You know, a lot of institutions make bigger and bigger and bigger buildings, more expensive buildings, and then they charge the students pay more. In those countries, they ask for fees, or private universities does that. They want to look bigger, not that more functional buildings, but larger buildings to look that way. That is one strategy as well that has also not so much to do with the content and the real surplus that university produce. But as Silent University, we didn't have to focus on having a large building. We didn't have to focus on having even any space that which we had occasionally. But it was more about this the design of institutional identity. Nobody expects from people who are undocumented to come up with a clever design that replace. Like, that's why we were immediately recognized in the same level. You know, it's already second year we were recognized in the same level of Oxford University, and work with their refugee studies centers, do events there, do talks there. So our speakers could actually talk there and get paid for it, because the design was like that. In Germany, I had this conversation with some places that we eventually, even we had the money, I disagreed to start a Silent University in those very left progressive looking institutions, because they only saw this concept of people as help concept. So they cannot do smart design. They cannot represent themselves in a smart, you know, it's like smart dress code. Good institutional design is a smart dress code. And they can only do sprays on the walls and maybe handwrite some poetries on the walls. They cannot imagine you walk into a space that has an institutional identity. You look at a card that looks more official than your actual official university card, you know, lecture card. You can actually get discount or free access to a lot of things when you have official looking card. And we use like a couple of examples from different universities how they have their cards, and we made a better one, and it actually worked. You know, it made it official. The recognition this is their recognition. You don't need authorization. you need a press card. You don't need a yellow press card. They say you need a yellow press card. You just need the right press card. So it's really important to use these tools that looks like they are designated for specifically something that is actually there and that obtains that kind of power, institutional power. But actually, it's easy to use it in a subversive way and claim that power right away. It's very much possible, especially now everything became online. I mean, there was a point, a lot of biennials happened, no one even went to visit, but they all had tote bags and a fancy website and catalogs ticked like this. No one had to go to the shows anymore. They just believed that there was a big biennial happening somewhere in the world, you know. So it's really about that representation, a power of representation. So design plays an important role in this. And to be taken immediately serious, you know, the way you make your statements, but also design is as important.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Are there any other people who want to ask questions?
Maybe that was the last one. Maybe there is one more.
So before handing over the word to Mariella, Maria, and Anneke for a final farewell, I wanted to say thank you because you raised the question I never asked myself. When is the right time to fire yourself? And I think this is a really inspiring one, and maybe we should, as scholars and representatives, think about this more. So thank you for this inspiring moment for the evening. Yeah, and now as we close down Sparring Academy for now, I give the word to Mariella, Anneke, Maria.
Thank you, Carolina. Yeah, thank you all so much. I feel very grateful for you all that you've been here today, and thank you for the good moderation, Carolina, and also for your talk and answering questions, Ahmet, and also for the last 3 days for the wonderful workshop. Yeah, I think now we have to close. But I really hope that there will be a new energy or other students who want to continue with this. It would be very marvelous. And if you're interested, you can write to us or whatever, or you can just do it by yourself. And yeah, we would be very, very happy if this format would be continued. And yeah, you can continue it as you want and with a topics that you're interested in. Yeah, I don't know if anybody of the team wants to add something.
Yeah, well, the thumbs up. Thank you everyone for joining. I enjoyed being part of the conversation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmet. And thank you, Carl.
Nice to meet you all.
Bye. Bye-bye.